The dress arrived on a Wednesday, which felt wrong somehow. Wednesdays were for grocery runs and dentist appointments, and for getting to reply to emails, not for opening a white garment bag that took up half my living room in my Kitchener apartment, and finding something that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread I'd never be featured in. I set my coffee down on the counter. I didn't pick it back up for a long time. The card tucked inside the zipper pocket said only, "For the Sullivan Rise reception, Saturday, 7 p.m. A car will come at 6:30, no signature, no explanation, as if I already knew, as if this was something I'd agreed to in another life and the paperwork had simply caught up with me. I suppose, in a way it had. My brother Luca had been underwater for 8 months before he told me. That was the thing about Luca. He had this particular talent for making catastrophe sound reasonable. He sat across from me at my kitchen table in February, holding a mug I'd bought at a craft market in Stratford, and said, "I got into some trouble with a business loan, a private one." I remember thinking, private loan, such a clean phrase for something so dirty. The amount he named made me set down my fork. We were eating pasta. I'd made it from scratch because it was his birthday, and that was our tradition. Pasta from scratch on birthdays, something our mother had started when we were small. "Luca, I know, that's not. How did you?" "I know, Margot." He used my full name. That's when I understood it was real. The lender, he explained, was not a bank, was not anything close to a bank. The man's name was Callum Whitfield, and even Luca flinched slightly when he said it, which told me everything about the kind of man Callum Whitfield was before I ever looked him up, which I did immediately, the moment Luca left. I sat on my bathroom floor with my phone, reading, and the tiles were cold through my jeans. Callum Whitfield, 41. Born in Halifax, built something in Vancouver, expanded east. The articles that mentioned him were careful. They said entrepreneur, investor, private equity. They said known to be litigious and closely connected to. And then they named people I vaguely recognized, names that showed up in court documents and business pages, and once, a National Post piece that had been edited significantly after publication. I found the original through an archived link. I read it twice. Luca owed him $180,000. The interest on that number was the kind that moved like a living thing. I was 31 years old, a senior project coordinator at an architectural firm in Waterloo, and I had precisely $24,000 in savings, a leased Honda Civic, and a very good credit score that would do absolutely nothing here. I didn't sleep that night. I made lists on a notepad. I crossed them all out. By morning, I'd done the math 17 different ways, and arrived at the same answer every time. I called the number Luca had given me with shaking hands, sitting in my car in the firm's parking garage, 40 minutes before I had to be at my desk for a site review meeting. A woman answered, very professional. She took my name, asked me to hold, and then, after what felt like several business days but was probably 90 seconds, a different voice came on the line. "Mrs. Beaumont." Not a question. He already knew who I was, Mr. Whitfield. My voice was steadier than I expected, a small mercy. "I was wondering when you'd call." A pause, and in that pause I could hear what sounded like wind, or maybe just the acoustics of a large, expensive room. "Your brother speaks highly of you. I'd like to discuss his situation. I imagined you might." Another pause. "Are you available Thursday afternoon?" I had a project deadline Thursday. I said yes without hesitating. His office was in a building on King Street in Toronto, a building passed 100 times without ever particularly noticing. That seemed fitting. 17th floor, glass and pale wood, a receptionist who didn't smile at me but wasn't unkind. I was shown into a boardroom and offered water, which I accepted and didn't drink. When Callum Whitfield walked in, my first thought, embarrassingly, irrelevantly, was that he looked exactly like someone who had never in his life been told no, and genuinely could not imagine why anyone would bother. Not in a cruel way, in a complete way, like a fact of physics. He was tall, dark-haired, going gray at the temples, wearing a suit that hadn't come off a rack. He sat down across from me without preamble, which I respected, even as it unnerved me. "You're here to negotiate," he said. "I'm here to understand the situation, and then, yes, to negotiate." Something shifted in his expression. Almost nothing. Barely a degree. "Most people come in here talking. Most people are nervous, and you're not." I met his eyes. They were a very specific shade of gray-green that I noticed and immediately wished I hadn't. "I'm extremely nervous," as I said, but I've found it's not useful." He looked at me for a moment that lasted slightly too long to be neutral. "Your brother owes me a significant sum," he said. "I know the sum, the interest. I know the interest. I've run the numbers." I set a folder on the table between us, printed, because I wanted something physical, something that showed I'd come prepared. "I can't cover it, not even close. I have assets that total approximately. I know what you have, Ms. Beaumont." He didn't look at the folder, the way he said it, flat, like a thing he'd simply looked up, the way you'd look up a postal code. I felt cold. I felt, briefly, like standing up and leaving. I pressed my hands flat against my thighs under the table and stayed. "Then you know I need a different kind of arrangement," I said. "I'm listening." I'd rehearsed this part. I'd stood in my shower the night before and said it out loud 3 times, which is something I do when I'm scared, have done since I was 17, and had to give a presentation on the French River watershed for a geography class, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. 6 months, I said. "I'll sign a contract. My salary will be directed toward the debt, a portion, enough to show good faith while I restructure my finances and negotiate a second option through." "No, just that." I stopped. No to the salary arrangement." He leaned back slightly, and for the first time he looked, not uncomfortable exactly, but like he was choosing his next words from a very specific set. "I have a different proposal." I waited. "I have a business event in April. The Sullivan Rise reception. It's a significant gathering, and I need someone to attend with me. A partner, in the social sense. Someone capable of navigating that kind of environment without coaching." I blinked. "You're asking me to attend a party with you? Several events, over the course of 6 months. And in exchange, I clear the debt. In full, your brother starts clean." The room was very quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Toronto spread out gray and cold and enormous. "That's not..." I started, and then stopped, because what was I going to say? "That's not proportionate?" Of course it wasn't proportionate. Nothing about this was proportionate. My brother had borrowed money from a man who operated outside the usual rules, and now we were sitting in a boardroom negotiating in terms that made my head ache. "Why?" I asked instead. "Why me specifically?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because your brother told me about you," he said. "And because you walked in here alone and didn't pretend you weren't afraid. I didn't know what to do with that. I still don't, really." "I'd want a contract," I said. "Specific terms, defined scope, an exit clause. Of course, I'd want independent legal review. I'd expect nothing less." I looked at him. He looked back at me. He wasn't smiling, but there was something in the set of his face that I couldn't read, and I am, generally, good at reading rooms. "I'll need 48 hours, I said. "You have them." I called my friend Blythe from the parking structure of a nearby mall because I couldn't figure out where else to go. Blythe is the kind of person who will answer the phone at any hour and not immediately tell you what you should have done differently, which is rarer than it should be. "He what?" she said. "Asked me to be his, I don't know, social companion, +1, for 6 months, and in return he wipes out your brother's debt." Yes, silence. "Margot, I know, that's over $180,000, I know, okay, but like..." She paused. "Is he attractive?" "Blythe, I'm just gathering information." I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. The parking structure smelled like exhaust and old concrete and someone's leftover drive-through. "That is genuinely not the relevant question." "It's not irrelevant," she said, and I could hear her moving around, probably making tea. "Margot, what does your gut say?" My gut said a lot of things. It said, "This is not normal." It said, "You don't know this man." It said, $180,000, Margot, think about what that means for Luca. Think about what the alternative looks like. It said, very quietly, in a register I didn't want to examine. "He looked at you like you were a surprise." "My gut says I need a lawyer," I said. "Start there," Blythe said, "and then tell me everything." The contract was 12 pages. My lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Fitzgerald, who charged aggressively and was worth every dollar, went through it with a highlighter and a very particular expression. She flagged 4 clauses, she added 3. When we sent the revised draft back, Whitfield's team accepted all the changes within 2 hours. "Huh," Miss Fitzgerald said. "What?" "He took them. All of them." She looked at me over her glasses. "Someone wanted this to work. I signed on a Friday afternoon in early March. Luca cried, which he would deny forever. I handed him a copy of the debt clearance confirmation, and he held it with both hands like it might disappear. "You didn't have to," he started. "I know I didn't have to," I said. "Don't." He nodded. "He made pasta for dinner from scratch. We didn't talk about it." The first event was a gallery opening in the Distillery District. A Canadian photographer, whose work I'd actually admired, which helped. I wore my own dress, dark green, which I'd bought 2 years ago for a colleague's wedding. Callum sent a car but didn't comment on what I wore when I got in, which I registered as either indifferent or considerate, and couldn't decide which. We were quiet for the first few minutes of the drive. "Have you been to this one before?" he asked, meaning the gallery. "No. I've seen her work online, though. The Northern Lights series." He glanced at me. "You follow her?" "I follow a lot of photographers. My firm works with a lot of visual artists on installations. It crosses over." "You're an architect?" "Project coordinator. I don't design. I manage the logistics of getting from design to built. Materials, scheduling, contracts, consultations." I paused. "Basically, I'm the person who tells everyone what they can't afford and why." A beat. "That sounds like what you did in my boardroom." I looked out the window. The city was doing that thing it does in March, where it can't decide whether it's winter anymore. Patches of old snow on the north sides of buildings, bare wet pavement, one brave crocus and a planter outside a cafe that we passed too quickly for me to be sure about. "I suppose it is." He was quiet again. Then, "For what it's worth, Miss Beaumont, I didn't think you'd actually call." I turned to look at him. "Why not? You have the kind of face that looks like you'd find another way." "I couldn't find another way." "I know," he said. "That's why I was surprised you called." I didn't respond, because I wasn't sure what he meant, and I've learned not to ask for clarification when I'm not ready for the answer. By the third event, a charity dinner in April, the Sullivan Rise reception the dress had been for, I had started to understand the shape of him. Callum Whitfield was, in public, extremely controlled. Not cold, not exactly. He was perfectly capable of charm when the situation called for it, and it did call for it at these gatherings, which were full of people performing their best versions of themselves. He could laugh at the right moment. He could remember names. He shook hands in a way that communicated presence without aggression, which is harder than it sounds. But he watched things. He was always slightly still, in a way that made you aware that nothing was escaping his notice. At the Sullivan Rise dinner, I found myself in conversation with a woman named Patricia, who sold commercial real estate, and had opinions about the new LRT lines, which I also had opinions about. So we talked for 15 minutes while waitstaff moved around us with trays of miniature tuna tartare. At some point, I turned and found Callum standing about 3 feet away, engaged in a conversation with a man in a very expensive tie, but watching me out of the corner of his eye, not in an unsettling way, in a way that felt like checking in. When Patricia excused herself, he appeared at my elbow. "Commercial real estate, LRT, she has thoughts. Everyone has thoughts about the LRT." He picked 2 glasses from a passing tray and handed one to me. "You were holding your own. Did you think I wouldn't be?" "No," he said, and there was something underneath it that I didn't know how to name. "I didn't think that." Later, between the dinner and the speeches, he leaned slightly toward me and said, in a voice that didn't carry past my ear, "The man at table 7 is going to try to speak with me. I'd appreciate a graceful exit around the 40-minute mark. What do I do? Tell me you're cold. I'll handle the rest. I'm always cold. I'm from Kitchener." His mouth moved almost a smile. Not quite. "I'll keep that in mind." At the 37-minute mark, I touched his sleeve and said, "I'm getting cold, I think." He turned immediately, said something brief and courteous to the man at table 7, and had us out of the ballroom in under 90 seconds. In the coat check line, he looked down at me. "You said 40, I miscounted." Something in his face shifted again. That degree. "Margot," he said. It was the first time he'd used my name. I felt it in an unexpected place, somewhere in the middle of my sternum, which is absurd, and I knew it was absurd even as it was happening. "Mr. Whitfield?" "Callum." A pause. "We've been doing this for 6 weeks." "Callum," I said. It felt strange. Ordinary and strange at once. In May, on a rainy Tuesday that had nothing to do with our arrangement. No event, no obligation. He texted me. "There's an exhibition at the Ago. The landscape photographer you mentioned in March. Closes Sunday, that was all. No question, no suggestion." I stared at it for a long time. I typed 3 different responses and deleted 2 of them. I was planning to go Saturday, I sent finally. He replied, so was I. We went separately. We arrived within 8 minutes of each other, which was probably coincidence, and spent 2 hours moving through the same gallery, at roughly the same pace, without discussing whether we were together or not. At one photograph, a long exposure shot of Lake Superior in a winter storm, the water almost silver, the sky indistinguishable from it, we both stopped at the same time. My grandmother had a cabin near Wawa, I said. Not because I'd planned to say anything, but because the image made me think of it suddenly and completely. We used to drive up every summer. She'd take us to the lake at dawn when it was still cold, and say the water was thinking. Callum was quiet for a moment. What did you think of that? When I was 7, I thought she was strange. I looked at the photograph. Now I think she was right. He turned to look at me then, not at the photograph, at me, and I made the mistake of looking back. Margot, he said. We're in a gallery, I said. I know where we are. People are. I know. He looked back at the photograph. His jaw worked for a second. I've been careful. I wasn't sure what he meant by that. I thought I might be starting to understand it, which was different. Callum, you don't have to say anything. Quickly, like he was getting ahead of something. We have the arrangement. I'm aware of what the arrangement is. Are you? I said. He went very still. What? Are you aware of what it is? I heard my own voice doing something I hadn't given it permission to do, going quiet and direct and leaving no room. Because I've been trying to be careful about that too, about what I'm allowed to notice. He turned to look at me again. This time he didn't look away. What have you noticed? He said. Low, very low. There was a family about 15 feet away. 2 parents and a child who was pointing at the photograph and saying something about the waves. There were other people behind us. The gallery hum of soft footsteps and hushed voices filled the space around us like water. That you check on me, I said. At events. Without making it obvious, I've noticed that. A breath. I've noticed that you remembered I was cold in March and made sure I had a wrap at the April dinner without saying anything about it. I thought it was just. I thought it was practical. It was practical, he said, and then, barely a pause, and it wasn't. I looked at the photograph of Lake Superior. My grandmother's voice came back to me from somewhere. The water is thinking, Margot. This is complicated, I said. Yes, we have a contract, we do. He said it like he already knew what came next and was braced for it. I want. Started again. I need it to be real, whatever this is. If it's something, I can't do something that's halfway. I know. His voice was careful. I know that about you. I knew it in February when you sat across from me and told me you were afraid, and then immediately made it irrelevant. I thought of that boardroom, the cold water I hadn't drunk. You hired me to be your date to a party. I know what I did. Why? He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer. Around us the gallery breathed its soft breath. The family with the child moved on. We stood in front of the lake that looked like it was thinking. Because I've known who you were for 2 years, he said finally. Luca talks about you. Constantly. Boringly. With, and here his mouth did something complicated. Enormous pride. A pause. I knew who you were before he ever got into trouble. I was not. Another pause, shorter. Uninvolved in making sure the debt was structured in a way that led to this conversation. The gallery was very loud suddenly. It wasn't loud. It felt loud. What does that mean? My voice came out smaller than I intended. It means I had options for how to handle your brother's debt that didn't involve you. He looked at me steadily. I chose differently, you. I stopped. Callum, I know what it is. His voice was even. It was not my finest decision. I'm not asking you to forgive it. I'm telling you because you asked why, and you deserve a real answer. I turned away from him. I looked at the photograph without seeing it. My heart was doing something unsteady. You should have told me, I said. From the beginning. Yes, that's not something I can just. I know. Stop agreeing with me. I don't know how else to answer you. His voice was quieter now, and something in it, some thin quality, some absence of the usual control, made me look back at him. He looked, for the first time, like someone who wasn't sure what happened next. I haven't asked you for anything, he said. I won't. Whatever you want the arrangement to be from here. He gestured slightly, a small movement that seemed to cost him something. I'll honor it, whatever you need from me. I thought of Luca at my kitchen table with my birthday pasta getting cold. I thought of a white garment bag on a Wednesday. I thought of the wrap at the April dinner, set carefully at the empty seat beside me while I was talking to Patricia about LRT lines, not said anything, not made anything of it, just there when I reached for it. I thought about a man who apparently spent 2 years listening to his borrower talk about his sister and made a choice I hadn't been given a say in, and then sat across from me in a boardroom and looked at me like I was the one surprising him. "You're going to have to actually say it," I said, clearly. "With words, Margot. Callum." I turned to face him fully. Words. Something moved through his face. "I don't want the arrangement," he said. "I want you to be here because you want to be here. He stopped, recalibrated. "I want to take you to galleries on rainy Saturdays because I want to. Not because it's written anywhere. Not because of Luca's debt or what I owe you for this year." His voice was level, but there was something working underneath it. "I want to know what you thought about when you were at your grandmother's cabin. I want to know what you fight about with your friends and what you're working on right now. And what you think about when it's 3 a.m. and you can't sleep. I've wanted a breath. I've wanted that for a long time, and I went about it very badly, and I know that." The gallery around us kept doing what galleries do. Someone's child laughed somewhere in the next room. Rain against the high windows. "Your grandmother's cabin," I said finally. I thought about becoming a marine biologist and whether I could convince her to let me get a dog. His breath shifted. "And she let me get the dog." I looked at him. "I'm still considering the marine biology thing." His face did what it did, almost a smile. Not quite. And then slowly it became one. A real one, the kind I hadn't seen yet, the kind that made the well-arranged exterior open up slightly and show something underneath that was quieter and less managed and, "You're smiling," I said. "I'm aware. I didn't know you did that. Apparently," he said, "I do." We had the contract voided 2 weeks later. Miss Fitzgerald was professional about it and did not ask questions, which I appreciated. Luca, when I told him, looked at me with an expression I recognized from when we were children, and he was trying to work out whether he'd accidentally won a game he didn't know he was playing. "So," he said carefully. "Don't," I said. I wasn't going to say anything. "You were absolutely going to say something." He made the pasta again anyway. We invited Callum this time, which was strange, and then wasn't. He arrived with wine. A proper Niagara bench red, which made Luca immediately like him slightly more than he'd planned to, and stood in my small kitchen while I cooked and answered Luca's questions with the particular stillness I'd come to understand meant he was paying attention to everything. At some point, Luca said, "She made this pasta for my birthday for 12 years in a row," and Callum turned to look at me with that quiet thing in his face, and I concentrated on the sauce. "Every year?" Callum said. "From scratch," Luca said proudly. "Even the year she had that terrible cold, Luca, and couldn't actually smell anything." Callum was looking at me. I didn't look back. "Lucky brother," he said, not to Luca, to the room. Later, when Luca had very strategically discovered a reason to check something in his car, and was taking an unusually long time doing so, Callum stood beside me at the sink while I rinsed a pot. "Margot," he said. "He's coming back in approximately 45 seconds, I know." A pause. "Is this all right? Being here?" I turned the tap off. "Which part?" "Any of it." And then quieter. "This." I turned around. He was closer than I'd realized, which was its own answer to something. And looking at me in that way he had. Taking me in, as though he had the patience for whatever this was going to take. "Yes," I said. "This is all right." He reached out and tucked a piece of hair back from my face. Just that, just a small careful thing. And then Luca opened the door from outside and came back in and said, loudly and obviously, "Great. The car is totally fine. Everything's fine." And I turned back to the stove and Callum poured more wine and the evening went on. On the drive home, his, not mine, because I'd driven separately, which in retrospect I should have known he'd make a point of, he walked me to my door without being asked. "You didn't have to," I said. "I wanted to. I found my keys." The hallway light in my building does this thing where it takes 3 seconds to decide to come on, and we stood in the almost dark for those 3 seconds, which felt deliberately cinematic and slightly unfair. "Callum, I'm not going to do anything," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you got in. I've been getting myself in for 31 years. I know that. A pause. He stopped. I wanted those 3 extra minutes. The light came on. I looked at him in it. He looked back. Next Saturday, I said. There's a market in the glebe I want to go to. And then I want lunch somewhere that isn't expensive. Ottawa. I'll drive, he said immediately. I'll let you drive, I said. We'll see about the rest. He was quiet. He was doing that thing. Taking it in, not rushing. Is that a yes to Saturday? That's a yes to Saturday. He nodded. Slowly. Like he was filing it somewhere safe. Good night, Margot. Good night, Callum. I went inside. I stood with my back against the door for a moment, in the dark of my own hallway, and thought about Lake Superior, in a winter storm and the way water looks when it's thinking. My phone buzzed. The market opens at 9. I'll bring coffee. I was smiling when I answered. I didn't try to stop. I take mine with oat milk, I sent back. You had 2 months to ask. His reply came almost immediately. I was paying attention, I know.